My name is Judith Mendoza, and I am a behavior consultant and educator. And today I will be speaking on social well-being. Today's topic is on communication, factors that make it happen. All information is in my opinion. So I want to concentrate on communication, but on a different way. We think about communication when it happens through our mouth and talking, speaking. Basically that we refer it to communication. And it is, because we can interchange our thoughts and our opinions, our beliefs with others. And so these, though, happen inside the brain, right? So in reality, communication through our mouth is the result from processed information from our brain. So I want to speak about the brain and to learn, so that we can learn a little bit more about it. According to the information that we know in regards to the brain is about 3 pounds. The brain is complex and is the most complicated part of the human body. So these organs, right, and this information that I'm telling you, you can find it also at the VeryWell mind. So this organ, the brain, is responsible for our intelligence, our thoughts, our sensations, our memories, our body movement, our feelings, and our behavior. So there has been done much research in this matter of the brain, and with reason, because of course we want to know how we function, and also when it comes to disease process, brain disorders that we may have, but also other physical disorders that may cause the brain to malfunction. So the human brain is believed to function in a complex chemical environment through various types of neurons and neurotransmitters. And so neurons are brain cells numbering in the millions and are capable of instant communication with each other through chemical messengers called neurotransmitters, right? So neurons are brain cells. And so when we think about this, right, because let me continue over here, and it says the center of the neuron is called the cell body or soma. It contains the nucleus, which houses the cells of DNA or genetic material. The cell's DNA defines what type of cell it is and how it will function. So when we think about what makes this function, we know that there are neurons, there are different types of neurons, and that are capable of communicating. So as we communicate, or as we take information, is received, is passed on through our hearing, or through our optical, or tactile, by touch, and is received inside of our brain. And from there are neurons and neurotransmitters that begin to communicate in order to process the information. So it mentions also that neurons are brain cells numbering in the billions and are capable of instant communication with each other through chemical messengers called neurotransmitters, right? And these neurotransmitters are, or it is believed that the brain contains several different types of chemical messengers or neurotransmitters. And so these messages are categorized or cataloged as either excitatory or inhibitory. And so there are these two types. Scientists have identified specific neurotransmitters that are believed to be related to anxiety disorders. And here is where we can pay attention in regards to how our nutrition affects the function, the chemical function of these neurotransmitters, of these neurons, in order to send proper messages to our brain, and in order for our brain to process it properly. So the types of neurotransmitters are, according to VeryWell Mind, are serotonin. This neurotransmitter plays a role in modulating a variety of body functions and feelings, including our mood. Low serotonin levels have been linked to depression and anxiety, as we know. Then another neurotransmitter is norepinephrine, that is believed to be associated with the fight or flight stress response. So norepinephrine. Another one is the gamma aminobutyric acid, and this is an inhibitory neurotransmitter that acts through a negative feedback system to block the transmission of a signal from one cell to another. So this is important to know, and I will post this information for you to read it, have a better understanding of what I'm talking about. But what I want to focus is, right, so this is what makes it happen, the communication happen. We receive information, and then we process that information that comes from another source, and so that we in communication are either the sender of the information that is received by another human being who processes this information, and so he's the receiver of this information, right? So there is the understanding of who sends the information and who receives it, or that's the way it should be. But we know that there are types of disorders, such as dissociative identity disorders, that can make the way that communication should happen difficult because of how it's being received, especially for those in the autism spectrum disorder. So we want to know a little bit more about neurons. So what are neurons? Neurons are the basic building blocks of the nervous system. These specialized cells are the information processing units of the brain responsible for receiving and transmitting information. Each part of the neuron plays a role in communicating information throughout the body. And so neurons carry messages throughout the body, including sensory information from external stimuli and signals from the brain to different muscle groups in the body. So then, having that information in mind, when we think about the function that these carry, the importance of it, and how our neurons and neurotransmitters that transmit these messages to different areas, we think about or we should think about how the process of nutrition, the role that it plays, or the importance of it that it plays in our life. And also, when it comes to having different tendencies that relate to abuse. For example, smoking, tobacco smoking, marijuana smoking, or doing other type of drugs, including prescribed medication if we abuse that also. Then alcohol, lack of sleep. All of these can be detrimental to the function or to how our brain is going to function, how these neurons are going to function, because we can damage ourselves. And so also it mentions that these specialized cells are information processing units of the brain responsible for receiving and transmitting information. The word cells come to mind. When you think about your cells, every cell in your body requires vitamin D. It requires vitamin B12, omega-3, vitamin E, vitamin C, in order to have an optimal function. And so it is also known that these neurons contain dendrites, or extensions. It says tree-like extensions at the beginning of a neuron that help increase the surface area of the cell body. And so these tiny protrusions receive information from other neurons and transmit electrical stimulation to the soma. Now, in regards to this, right, there is an article from the magazine or the publications NeuroScience. They have uncovered a never before seen type of signal occurring in the human brain. And the reason for this is that they are now doing studies relating to the human brain with human brains. So they are having a better understanding, and understanding that human brains are not like animal brains. Now, This article was published in I will post it also. And it says that scientists have discovered a unique form of cell messaging occurring in the human brain that's not been seen before. So again, our bodies are made up of cells. Our cells can get damaged. Our cells can get damaged through the deficiencies in our nutrition, our amino acids, our sleeping habits, right? Because the brain requires that we rest. Then there are minerals that the body cannot produce that we must intake. And so all of these, they are finding out that affect the brain messaging system. And so if that's not functioning well, then we're not going to function well, and our communication is not going to function well, or the way that we receive the information and bring it out, because of the thought process. Now, it says that researchers from institutes in Germany and Greece uncover a mechanism in the brain's outer cortical cells that produces a novel greater signal all on its own, one that could provide individual neurons with another way to carry out their logical functions. Right? So it has been believed that humans' brain could be compared to a computer. And it can be in certain ways, but of course our brains are way more sophisticated and more reliable than a computer. It can retain a lot of information, and it doesn't get damaged in a way, right? Unless we don't take care of it, unless there are inherited diseases and illnesses, but otherwise we know that our brains have a very good function. So in here it says our brains, and this is from NeuroScience, our brains are computers that work using a system of connected brain cells called neurons that exchange information using chemical and electric signals called action potentials. Researchers have discovered that certain cells in the human cortex, the outer layer of the brain, transmit signals in a way not seen in corresponding rodent cells. This process might be important to better understanding in our unique brains and to improving programs that are based on model of the human brain. Yes, that is needed, because a rodent is not a human. So of course you're going to see some different function, because animals don't process thinking the way that we do. They don't have feelings, or they don't process emotion the way that we do. They don't feel pity. They don't feel sorrow. They don't feel all these feelings that we humans feel and process and think about, right? So it mentions that by measuring the electrical activity in sections of tissue removed during surgery on epileptic patients and analyzing their structure using fluorescent microscopy, the neurologist found individual cells in the cortex used not just the usual sodium ions to fire, but calcium as well. So minerals that we intake are being used by our brain to function. So what if we are lacking in this? What if we are deficient? What if we have too much of it? We know that calcium is all often related only to bones. It's not, you don't think about doing this, causing your brain to have the effect as he's speaking over here in regards to the individual cells in the cortex. And so it mentions that this combination of positively charged ions kicked off waves of voltage that had never been seen before, referred to as calcium-mediated dendritic action potentials, or DC caps. So they are finding out that calcium as well as sodium ions can have this voltage effect in our brain that basically has electricity in order for it to function, along with the chemicals that it functions. All of these are part of our nutrition, part of minerals, amino acids, antioxidants that we intake through our food. But if we don't, then there's where we have malfunctions. So understanding how our brain functions, then it will give us more reasons for us to take care of ourselves. And so it mentions that in neurons, the signal is in the form of a wave of opening and closing channels that exchange charged particles such as sodium, chloride, and potassium. This pulse of flowing ions is called an action potential. But what if you're deficient? So, of course, the way that we will know in regards to these minerals and this nutrition that should exist in our body, including hydration, including exercise, including having good sleep for our brain, then doing laboratory, to find out how we are being affected. Are we having high of something and then maybe deficient in something else? For example, I mentioned that calcium, but having too much calcium in the body, it can cause the nervous system to go unbalanced and malfunction, and then we experience it in the way of anxiety disorders that exist in different types of illnesses and diseases. And we know also how we are affected by it when it comes to our mind, our thoughts, and the way that we behave. So this is a different way, right, of seeing it, because we tend to think in like separate ways, right? Just like communication, we tend to just compare it to the words that we speak out with our mouth, and so we tend to just say, well, communication is just about that, but it's not. It begins in our brain. And then also when it comes to what we are eating and what we're drinking, we believe, well, it doesn't affect me. And if I have deficiencies, also we see it as if it doesn't affect us. And we tend to believe that our body produces these things like from the air. But we are seeing here that the same things that we are being recommended to eat in our diets, or the food that we eat usually, that we intake these things. And now I mentioned in regards to having more of some things and then deficient on others, that will bring a chemical imbalance. And we will see these in different types of disorders that we know that will happen to us. And so, but the studies that they are doing explain better. We can visualize what the body is going through. Even though we cannot see from the inside of the body, we can visualize what's going on, what the body is going through. And so it says the experiments reveal the presence of a new kind of action potential that travels with the help of calcium ions rather than sodium and calcium ions. It's a kind of action potential not seen before in mammalian cortex cells, according to the paper published in Science. And of course, this is because this is now happening with humans, human brains. So instead of transistors, neurons manage these messages chemically at the end of branches called dendrites. And this is what the function of dendrites are. The dendrites are central to understanding the brain because they are at the core of what determines the computational power of single neurons. And that is according to what Humboldt University neuroscientist said, Matthew Larcom, which information was told to Walter Beckwith at the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Right? So all of these are part of it, but then their function is through whatever we eat, whatever nutrition, whatever if we're not eating properly, and usually we don't, so we'll need the supplementation of vitamins in order for us to have what we need, and making sure that we have the vital vitamins for the brain, which are the vitamin D, vitamin B12, or B complex, vitamin E, omega-3, and vitamin C. All that in combination. And also magnesium activates the vitamin D, which is a hormone inside the body, and the vitamin C helps that the body absorb the vitamin E inside the body, which acts as an antioxidant, right? So it was found, it says, studies like these have their limitations. The researchers couldn't model the entire neuron, and the work wasn't carried out in humans, just in human cells. Perhaps other mammals do fire these kind of actions potentials, but they are not visible in what they did. To ensure any discoveries weren't unique to people with epilepsy, they double-checked with the results in a handful of samples taken from others, from brain tumors. And so they found, it says, finding an action potential mediated by calcium is interesting enough, but modeling the way this sensitive new kind of signal worked in the cortex revealed a surprise. So what they are finding, right? And this is what I wanted to bring out, because the information is there. You can see it, I can see it, I can read it, I can understand it. And so the information is there from NeuroScience magazine, and also from the VeryWell Mind publications, right? But how we put this together, all this information together with our well-being when it comes to our physical well-being, the way that our brain is going to function. Having a good function in our brain means that we will have a good function with our verbal communication with others, which communication, we have to remember that this information that the brain processes, right, or the work that the brain do, the brain is an organ that is responsible for intelligence, thoughts, sensations, memories, body movement, feelings, and behavior. So depending on the well-being, the health of our brain, of our body, because our brain is attached to our body, right? We're together, so we shouldn't be separating one from the other. Then depending on how well we are in our whole human existence, then that is how well we are going to feel, how well we are going to communicate, and how we're going to communicate with others, how we're going to understand information. Remember that neurons and neurotransmitters are responsible for how we process the information. And if there's deficiencies in our body, which our brain uses, right? There were some chemical reaction that happens in the brain, but then these are also powered by the minerals that we take. But then these minerals, depending on if we're deficient or if we have too much of, like in the case of calcium, which some people may have too much calcium in their body and not being processed correctly, not going to the bones as it's supposed to be. And we know that the calcium is not only related to bones. That's not the only function that it has. So when it comes to our brains, and then taking care of ourselves, which is our brains, our intelligence, right? Depending on how good we are in remembering things will depend on how healthy I'm eating, what healthy habits I follow. When it comes to things that may make it difficult for me to have the brain to work better, we have alcohol and tobacco use and abuse, right? So according to the publication over here from the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse, it mentions this, that alcohol and tobacco are among the top causes of preventable death in the United States. Moreover, these substances often are used together, right? So it makes the situation worse. Studies have found that people who smoke are much more likely to drink, and people who drink are much more likely to smoke. And of course, I know that there can be a difference because there's two groups. There are people who smoke and there are people who don't smoke. So what makes the difference? What makes the difference between these two groups of people? Well, sometimes I have found that the difference can be that even though the two groups may be going through the same thing, anxiety disorders, these two groups, this other group depends on or has certain type of values, spiritual values, that the person decides, well, this is not good for me to do. So even though that person is going through the same feeling the same condition in regards to anxiety, that person decides, well, I am not going to do that because it is related to spiritual values. But then the group that doesn't or may not have these different values, or even valuing life itself, right? Which usually it is, if you value your life, usually it's connected to having spiritual values. And so this other group who does not have these values are more prone to get into the habit of taking and abusing alcohol, taking and abusing tobacco, and then from there even moving on to other drugs like smoking marijuana or doing other drugs such as cocaine, or even with medication, prescribed medication. Someone can abuse that, and all of it causes harm to the brain, right? So we know that as it was mentioned, it affects behavior, it affects language, it affects our mood, and it affects our intelligence, our thoughts, our sensations, our memories, our body movements, our feelings. So all of these can be affected. The chemical reaction that we may experience also, imbalances because of abuse and use of these things. And so we want to think about these matters, of course, and especially when it comes to attention deficit disorders and autism spectrum disorder, which are disorders that are affected, their nervous system is affected, but then also, for example, in autism, communication is already affected because of the way that the brain has developed. So then that is what I wanted to bring out, because communication is not just saying words out. There have to be a thought process for it, where you receive information in communication. Either you are the receiver of information or you are the sender of information. The information then is processed in the brain, but if there is a malfunction inside the brain, then of course there is going to be misunderstandings. The way that you're receiving information is mentioned over here, that our brains are responsible for our intelligence. So depending on what we're doing, we may be lacking intelligence. We may be lacking the way that we process information, and we're not processing information correctly because those neurons and neurotransmitters are not working in the way that they should be. And this will go into what we're eating, first and foremost, into what we're putting inside our body, having deficiencies that we're not taking care of, and they are not going to get any better as we get older. And so then also our thoughts, our sensations, our memories, our body movement, our feelings, our behavior, all of it is being affected. So we have to keep in mind, of course, that communication is not just what we say out, words that we may put together and just say them out without having a process in our mind that will affect our sensations, our memories, our feelings, and our behavior. Right? Especially when it comes or when it has to do with communication with others, with other humans. And then which is the problem that exists with those in the autism spectrum disorder. And but we see and we know, we can tell, well, it's not that they are not putting things together. That is not the only thing that is happening. It's not just that they can say the words out. It's what is happening in the brain. What might be lacking, because they are literal thinkers. And so they only can process information in a literal way. So when you do labs, when you do laboratory, what do you find? Do you find any deficiencies in this type of minerals that help the brain function? The chemicals, the chemical reactions that are needed. So of course, all of these are things that we will find out as they find out more information, right? And I will be posting these in the along with this video, so that you can review it if you want to review it. And so that was it for today. That is the information that I had. So communication and factors that make it happen, which are these, which are the neurons, the neurotransmitters, the chemical reactions in it, the different minerals that are happening in the brain that are being used in order for it to work our circuitry inside of the brain, and for it to make connections, send messages as it receives the information, right? And so communication, it starts in the brain. In having good communication, have to do also with our physical, and physical, including the brain, well-being, and that well-being will help us have better function when we communicate. Because also when it comes to having deficiencies, some of the things that can happen, as is mentioned, it affects the nervous system. And so if it affects the nervous system, it affects the person, and so it affects the thoughts of the person, the sensations of the person. The person may turn to self-medication through the use and abuse of tobacco or drugs or alcohol, and then what happens then to communication with other humans is hindered. And sometimes it can become as difficult as not being able to produce thoughts, form words, so that one can communicate with others, as it happens in autism spectrum disorder. So of course, knowing more about these functions and how it relate to our communication, it will help us to give more importance to all these other things that we are getting recommendation on. So I thank you for listening today. My name is Judith Mendoza. I am a behavior consultant and educator, and today's topic was about social well-being, communication, factors that make it happen. And I also do a lot of work when it comes to autism spectrum disorder, and autism awareness, which is telling others in regards to not just that autism exists, but how autism happens, how it affects the person and family members and caregivers when it comes to this. So join me in continuing the efforts to aid communities have better understanding regarding autism related developmental delays and disorders, and I thank you for your donation. Have a pleasant day.